Now, when we store data on-prem or possibly just like in your house, like in your home office, since storage is so cheap when you are managing it locally, you buy a hard drive or, you buy a RAID array or a NAS or whatever, the storage is so cheap that we'll often just like throw stuff in a folder and never think about it again. But when you're paying per, byte over time for things that are stored in the cloud, you have to think about the life cycle of the data that is there. Now, yes, there is some data that you're going to want to keep absolutely forever. There is some data that you're going to be required by law to keep for a certain amount of time. Like retention laws mean that, if you collect this data, you have to keep it for so long. And that's going to vary from location to location and use case to use case. But you have to think about it more when you're storing your data in the cloud. And there's a couple aspects I want to look at. I want to talk about like soft delete and versioning, but I also want to talk about classing your data and the life cycle of your data inside of a bucket. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to the price that you're going to pay for the various types of storage and how much storage you're keeping over time. So first, let's talk about soft deleting or versioning. Now, this happens by default. When you create a bucket, soft delete is turned on to 7 days. So I'm going to go into Buckety Bucket here, and the protection tab right here, if we look at this, we're going to see that the soft delete policy is enabled for 7 days. Again, this is default. I did not turn this on for the bucket. This is how it, was built by default. Now we can edit this, but basically what this means is that if you delete an item, it disappears from the bucket, but it will kind of stay in like limbo for 7 days before it's really deleted. So if you accidentally delete something, you can get it back. Or if during the process of, like your day-to-day action, a deleted file that wasn't accidentally deleted, but it turns out that you needed it, you could go back and get that. And it will keep multiple versions of your deleted files for up to 7 days, right? So by default, it is turned on. We also have object versioning, which is here turned on. And that means like if you save a file, make a change, save a file, it will keep versions of that file. And you'll see there are some rules here. We're going to look at the versioning and the lifecycle rules in a second, but I just want to talk about the various types of things here. Then we have retention. Like I said, some things you have to keep and you can't delete them once you collect them. And that's where we can set like a bucket level retention policy where we would say, everything in this bucket has to be stored for, X number of seconds or days or months or years. And that's going to, again, be bucket wide, which is really a great way to sort things out. So you don't have to go individual item by individual item, but there might be an individual item that you have to retain for a certain amount of time, in which case you can turn on individual object retention. It's not enabled here, but you can, enable object retention for like, let's say you collect all sorts of stuff in a bucket, but one piece you do have to keep for longer than the other. So you can set up individual objects, but generally you can just set up the bucket retention policy bucket wide. And event hold option, that's disabled. This means that once it's uploaded, there's like a hold on it. So this is kind of getting too deep in the weeds, but this means that it can't be modified for a certain amount of time to make sure that it's the proper data. But the really big things to worry about are the versioning, meaning like if you save it, make a change, save it, the versioning is there. Retention policy, it's going to keep it and not going to let you delete it for a certain amount of time. And then the soft delete policy. And like I said, this is on by default and it's usually a good idea. However, if you have a situation where you get lots of data dumped into buckets constantly, you work with that data and then you delete it. So it's, comes in quick and then, you get rid of it quick. You might want to turn off soft delete because all of those items that are coming in, when you delete them, they're going to be still charging you for 7 days. And if they're absolutely nothing that you're going to want to go back to, especially if they're a high quantity of larger, or, depending on how big it is, large could build up just by sheer number, you might want to turn off or at least turn down the soft delete policy, because you're charged for those. Even though they're deleted, they're still there. And so it's important to know that you could really rack up some charges with the soft delete enabled. Even though you don't see them in the bucket, they're still there. And all of these rules are going to be part of the life cycle. So if you look right here, see where it says life cycle, it is important to note that it could take 24 hours for stuff to take effect. But how this works is it's set up life cycle rules. Like when we had soft delete enabled, what happens behind the scenes is a life cycle rule is added here. This delete object 7 days since object became non-current. That's their phrase for it's non-current if you deleted it, but then it really gets rid of it after 7 days. And then this is another one that I think this was here by default as well. Delete multi-part upload. So if you're uploading something and it doesn't complete, it will keep that partial one, so you can complete an upload, especially if it's a big file, but it will keep those partial uploads unless, until it times out. So you want to make sure that all of those partial uploads, especially if you have large uploads that regularly fail partway through, you're going to want to make sure that those are deleted fairly quickly as well. Now we could add more rules. So let's add a rule. And generally the rules that we're going to add here are changing the class of storage. Now we have covered storage classes in videos in the past, skills in the past. Basically there are 4 types of storage classes that are available. And what we can do is change from the default class, which starts out as just standard storage, right? It's just the standard, use it, in the immediate upload, download. It's just, always available. And it's, that's the default when you create a bucket. But you can change it to set the storage class to nearline or cold line or archive, or delete the object after a certain amount of time, and delete the multi-part upload, which is, again, that's already been specified. But let's say that we want to set the storage class of all of our bucket items to nearline. Again, this means that we don't access it except like once a month, right? And again, we covered this in previous skills, but basically it's cheaper storage as long as you don't access it very often, and it goes up. Like the nearline storage you access, and that it's nice they put this information here. If you access it less than once a month, nearline storage is going to be most affordable. If you access it less than once a quarter, so like you don't have to get to it except maybe every 3 months, then you want to put it on cold line storage. Again, it's cheaper, but when you access it, it's more expensive. So the less frequently you need to get to it, you kind of move up the scale here. And then archive, again, you don't access it once a year. Generally, this is going to be like disaster recovery backups kind of thing. Then you can set it to archive, and you can set this, change the class of storage automatically. And they also included, you can set an action to delete it or delete the multi-part. But let's say we're going to set the storage class to archive, and the conditions are here. Here are the conditions that we can make the class change, right? Again, they start a standard class and we're changing it to archive. So we could say the object name matches a prefix or a suffix. Like let's say we have we name all of our disaster recovery backup files .bak. Okay, so that means that as soon as something is added to this bucket and it has the file extension or the suffix at the end .bak, it's going to change it to archive storage, which is going to save us money in storage fees as long as we don't access it and have to like download that disaster recovery backup file, because that's going to cost us a lot. Now, of course, it is going to be accessible if we have a disaster, but it's not something that we hope to need to get more than maybe once a year, maybe never. But that's archive is like the cheapest storage as long as you don't access it very often. Okay, so we could do it by that. We could say as soon as our backup file is like 7 days old. Like after a week, our disaster backup is going to go into archive mode, or I mean, all of these things here, became non-concurrent before, like meaning we deleted it, we soft deleted it. All of these different conditions are going to be how we can make that change. So I'm going to leave that one in there. So .back is the file extension, and I will create that. So anytime we create a file and it has the extension .bak, it's going to be switched to archive storage inside our bucket, right? It's going to switch to that class of archive in there. Now, this can get complicated really quick, as you can imagine. And so while it's important that we do this to use our storage in the most economical way possible, if you have a bucket that has all sorts of different stuff. Now, if you have a bucket that has just your backups, which is a great way to design your buckets, right? You have like your disaster recovery bucket, and every time you put something in there with the .bak, it's going to make it archive class stored data. That's great. But if you have a bucket with lots of different kinds of files, like this is just like a catch-all bucket where people will add their backups, they're going to add, pictures, their profile pics, they're going to add their documents, you might want to actually set up autoclass. Because this, we're manually changing the classes of the files based on conditions that we set. But autoclass is something where Google will look at the file and how regularly that type of file is accessed, and they will decide what storage class makes the most sense. Now, why wouldn't we do this for everything? I mean, wouldn't we want Google to just automatically use their wisdom to decide our data? Well, it's a little more expensive to have autoclass turned on a bucket, right? There is a fee per gigabyte of storage that you have to have autoclass turned on. And it's generally not economical unless you have that situation where a particular bucket has lots of different types of data that is going to make sense to have different classes assigned to the individual bucket objects, in which case autoclass will make sense. But in general, it just makes more sense to create a bucket for the specific purpose of like archive files, right? And then everything that gets put in there becomes an archive based on a condition, or you can just set the actual bucket to be that class of storage from the beginning. So let's check out some configuration options for the individual buckets. Now we're here in the bucket details. Let's go back, buckety bucket. If we go to configuration for a bucket, I'm going to come back over here. If we go to the configuration, the default storage class in this bucket is standard, meaning it's standard. There's no penalty for early withdrawal, if you will. So we can change it though. We could say that the default class for anything put in here is archive. Like I said, if we have a bucket specifically for long-term storage, like our disaster recovery, we could say, I want everything in this bucket to be archive data. And then we'll never retrieve it. We'll put it in there and never take it back unless there's a horrible disaster, okay? And it's going to be the cheapest way to store data. Or we could do like cold line or nearline, depending on our individual data needs. And this is going to be the default class for the bucket. Now we could still do lifecycle rules to change the class of individual files based on those configurations. But by default, it was the standard, right? This is how it was created, but we could change the default class for newly added files, or we can turn on autoclass. And this is where we let Google decide what class of storage to use for each individual item in the bucket over time. But again, just know that it's slightly more expensive to use autoclass, but you could save yourself a lot of money if you don't want to go through the process of trying to figure out when it makes the most sense to set something to archive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if Google makes mistakes, generally they eat a lot of the cost with autoclass stuff. If you, if they accidentally autoclass something incorrectly, there's a lot more forgiveness on their part, but it is a more expensive way to go about things. So anyway, I included a link on autoclass pricing in the skill, so you can look at how it's all determined. But this is where you would make that change, is in the, I don't know what happened there, is in the configuration of the bucket itself. Okay. And there are other things that we could change in here too. Like this is where we change the fine grain access control. You can actually do it here instead of going up to the tab here. There's all sorts of different things that we see about the individual bucket in configuration, but this is where we would change that class setting to the default storage class, and that's where we turn on autoclass. Even though it doesn't say anything about autoclass here, this is where you would change it to autoclass. I know storage just seems simple, especially when you just have a big old hard drive and you just dump all your stuff in it. But if you're storing data in the cloud, there's a lot to consider, and you have a lot of tools in Google Cloud Platform to help make managing that data smooth, automatic, and hopefully at the end of the day, once the configuration is made, a little bit simpler, so you don't have to worry so much. You can handle a lot of it automatically.